Hello and welcome to Destination Draft Day. I'm Michael Rockman, joined by my co-hosts Nick Durst and Brian Sosa. We got a lot to talk about. First and foremost, though, we need to ask our co-hosts how we're doing on this wonderful Friday. So, Nick and Brian, how are you guys?
Listen, we're doing well. We're in New York. It's beautiful 67 degrees here, but nobody's doing better than you, Mr. Landy's Pro Football published author over here. Tell the audience about that and what a great accomplishment that is for you.
Sorry, putting me on the spot a little bit, but I got an agreement to work for the Lindy's Sports draft guide this year. They had a 2021 NFL draft edition that has hit stores nationwide. It was a wonderful opportunity. I really didn't expect it to happen. Especially with this pandemic going on, there's been a lot in terms of work that just hasn't been available. So getting a gig like this was definitely a huge opportunity, and I'm super thankful for it.
Well, congratulations. Well-deserved. And nobody, right, Brian, will agree with me here, nobody knows the draft quite like Michael Rockman.
Oh, please. There's nobody more prepared. There's nobody who thinks about it deeper, tries to give the people relevant content surrounding their team. I think a lot of people that do this really like to talk about it with their own team and don't really put as much effort in it with every other team. But Michael is knee deep in the draft for everybody. So he's got you covered. Well deserved.
Yeah, Michael's already looking at next year's draft, the 2022 draft, to see who could actually not get drafted and who's going to play in the XFL, CFL merger that we're discussing. He already knows which guys are just going to not make it the NFL teams and play some spring ball and then hopefully get into the NFL after they play in the XFL, CFL championship game, which is probably going to be around a 1 p.m. kickoff on WrestleMania Sunday in 2022.
I think you guys give me a little too much credit.
Yeah, it's just like when Nick Saban wins the national championship. He takes about a day off, and then he's already watching film, visiting high school kids. The draft is going to end on Saturday, and by Sunday night, Michael Rockman's going to be working on the 2022 NFL draft. You already know it.
Well, that's not even an exaggeration because he will have his mock ready to go the next day.
And we'll be here on Destination Draft Day to talk about it. You believe it?
It's gonna be cool. We're gonna be on, the day after the first round of the draft, but day 2 and 3 we're gonna be on just a few hours before day 2 for the second and third round. So Michael will have a lot to wrap his mind around there, which should be pretty cool. But let's first talk about Michael's team here, the New England Patriots. Shockingly, they're giving Newton a $13 million raise, and they're bringing him back for $14 million. I did not see this coming, but I guess maybe Bill said, I don't really like these young quarterbacks, or maybe I like somebody but I don't want to move up. Maybe he liked Mac Jones but doesn't think he's going to be there. Michael, what are your thoughts here as a fan here? And also, what do you think the Patriots are going to do here? Are they still going to try to get somebody like Garoppolo or sign somebody here, or are they going to roll with Newton next year as a starter? I would think for $14 million he's going to start.
Yeah, I mean, the contract itself isn't necessarily going to hit that $14 million number. It's about $5 million, and then there is $6 to $9 million in incentives that can happen, with the Pro Bowl appearance, with the Super Bowl MVP, making playoffs, stuff like that. So the opportunity to increase that number is definitely there, but the cap hit itself isn't too bad. So I think the answer that comes from this deal is that the Patriots are not in the market for a veteran QB. I think looking at guys like Jacoby Brissett, guys like Andy Dalton, they aren't going to be in New England next year. But I don't think that eliminates the possibility of the Patriots looking at a QB in the draft. So whether you're looking at a guy in the first round like a Mac Jones, like a Trey Lance, or Justin Fields that could potentially get back far enough to where the Patriots would either be able to pick them or trade up for them, that's definitely a possibility. Or maybe they take a chance on Newton being a longer-term QB than just a one-season, whole placeholder for whoever their QB is, and look at a guy like Kellen Mond or Davis Mills or Jamie Newman or Kyle Trask in the mid-round. So I don't think the Patriots are out in terms of pursuing a quarterback. I do think, though, that in the free agency market, we will not see them sign anyone more than, a casual backup deal that is maybe for the minimum.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I'd be worried about Newton, though. Brian from the Jets' perspective here, and maybe the perspective from the Bills and the Dolphins as well. Isn't this like okay, great, go ahead, try it again with Newton. We're not really scared of you type of situation?
For next year, maybe yes, but in the long term, I think that Bill knows exactly what he's doing. Michael and I discussed when we were doing the Patriots blueprint about just how much money and cap space that they have, and I think that a move like this kind of proves a little bit of what I was saying, that the Patriots rebuild isn't going to all take place in 1 year. Bill knows that. They're not going to spend all of the money that they have this year. They're going to have a ton of money next year also when Newton's $14 million comes off the books again. So, yeah, it's a stopgap option. I don't think that the Patriots, probably don't see themselves, as weird as it sounds, as Super Bowl contenders the way they have been every year for the last 20 years. There will be AFC teams again for the second straight year that, are in a lot better shape than them going into this season. But going into 2022 after next year, that's not going to be the case anymore. And it's going to be back to the Patriots being like a full strength powerhouse. Newton probably won't be part of those plans. But at this point, they'll field a competitive team and they'll be better than they were last year. And they'll probably be in the thick of things. But I do think that a team like the Bills is like, all right, we have one more year right now to be the best team in the AFCs.
Michael, what do you think about the Dolphins after 1 year cutting Kyle Van Noy, who was, I think, very important to their defense last year? And do we potentially see him back in New England with Belichick and Patricia?
Yeah, I think the odds of him back in New England are very high, just because it's not like he left with bad blood. The issue was the Patriots had almost zero money. They pretty much told Van Noy, look, go get your check because we aren't going to be able to keep you. Hopefully we'll be able to, somewhat replace you. But we saw last year, they weren't really able to do that. Even though I do like Anfernee Jennings and I like Josh Uche, I think the clear point is that Kyle Van Noy is a absolute presence. So, adding him to a place like a, New England or maybe a place like Las Vegas, I think is very likely. And I think he's going to have a market, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him back with the Patriots. Looking at it from the Patriots' perspective, by the way, with the Cam Newton thing, I think this kind of indicates that, this year they don't plan on being the contender that maybe a lot of people kind of hoped would happen with Bill being able to work all this money, that there would be this Patriots resurgence kind of. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think they are going to try to get this roster as potentially competitive as possible, and they're going to try to compete and try to contend. But I do think that the ability to build a roster around a rookie QB is absolutely a huge luxury in the NFL that has been pointed to success time and time again. So if they can get a QB in the first round that works out for them, then it would be absolutely huge for Bill and the Patriots, especially with all the cap that is currently in place for not only this year, but next year as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And then, not to be outdone, an hour after this is announced, Tom Brady signs a 1-year extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's already signed for this season, so that's an additional year. I love it, Michael. Let's just see how far this guy can go. I'd love to see him play until he's 50.
Absolutely. He's just trying to create space for his teammates, trying to keep it going to where he can run it back and hopefully win another Super Bowl for himself. And, you're never going to fault the guy for taking less money or spreading it out so that he can get some of his teammates back. That's just a great move that Brady's kind of done his entire career.
What do you think, Brian? How much longer is Brady going to torment the rest of the league?
Man, he won the Super Bowl and he's still playing, so there's really no sign to take that says maybe this will happen and then he'll go. That's it. He could have had his chance to leave in his 40s as a champion, but it's an insatiable appetite for greatness, I suppose. I'm going to say he's got 2 or 3 more.
I saw something circulating on Facebook the other day. It was like, Tom Brady, he's in his 40s, and then, everyone's complaining that, he keeps winning, and these other quarterbacks like, I need help, but they're cashing in with these huge contracts. Meanwhile, like Michael said, Brady every year takes his money away from him so you win. So it's really do you want to win? You want to make money. So it's tough to see things that we got to discuss like that. This Dak Prescott gets this ridiculous amount of money, guys, $40 million a year. I think that's so risky for the Cowboys because it's coming off the injury, and I don't know. Everybody's got different varying opinions on Dak. I think they should have paid Dak over Ezekiel Elliott, but $40 million is a lot. Brian, if you had to like put, Prescott in a tier of quarterbacks, he's not a tier one guy. We know tier one guys, we probably got it's Mahomes and Rodgers. You want to put Brady in be tier one, great. Tier two, you got these other guys. Maybe he's a tier 3 or 4 quarterback. But what do you think about Dak getting that big payday? And is that good for the Cowboys or bad? Because I think it's going to be really tough for them to fill the needs around him and build the team they need here with $40 million going to him.
I'm pretty stunned with the amount because this is what Dak wanted before he got hurt, and they were like, no. And then after he gets hurt, he's not even back yet, and they give him $40 million for multiple years. So it's not that he's not a good quarterback. He's a very solid quarterback, and their offense is much better with him than without him. I think this is Jerry Jones written all over it. I think that because Jerry Jones sort of found Dak Prescott in the depths of the draft a little bit in the 4th round, when you re-sign him as the quarterback who makes the most money out of anybody or whatever the label ends up being after this contract, Jerry Jones gets to be like, see, I found that guy. And I think that that's what matters to Jerry Jones ultimately, like as much as, anything else. It doesn't mean he doesn't want to win. I just think that it would cloud his judgment most likely. And if the Cowboys have other holes, especially on offense, that they don't fill, and it's because they ended up giving Dak $40 million, well, then it's a bad deal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough. We talked about this going into the Super Bowl. We actually said, Mahomes are they able to sustain the success when Mahomes' big contract kicks in and building around him? And really, honestly, the only person I could think of that is being able to have long-term success and consistently be in the playoffs is Brady. Breeze worked some things around, so the Saints were good, but they also had years when they missed the playoffs. Roethlisberger, the Steelers missed the playoffs, but we could also talk about that. Roethlisberger redid his deal, so he's going to come back and try to work and build around his quarterback. So it's interesting. We all know, Michael, you build through the draft, and your best window to win with a quarterback is in his first 5 years when you have that team-friendly cap hit there.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm sure you guys talked about it a little bit, but with the new TV deal, it's going to help kind of make this number not seem as bad. Looking at it right now, I think hitting that, 4-year deal with $40 million a year, it's big. But I think at the same time, with how the Cowboys are currently structured, there's definitely a lot of room to work with. Even this free agency cycle, they can be major players because they can restructure so many contracts like Jerry Jones always does. And he's going to be able to go out and get some guys on the defense, whether that's a Richard Sherman or some other corner that can help step into the secondary and give a veteran presence right away, getting a safety to play free safety for this team, getting some linebacker help, getting some presence at the edge. I think they are very much still a competitive team. And even with these, contracts that are on the books that maybe have question marks, not just Dak, but you look at someone like Zeke, is he going to be able to bounce back? Someone like Tyron Smith, is he going to be able to stay healthy? There's question marks on this team, but I still think with the way that they've structured it, I kind of admire Jerry Jones' strategy of just, spend it all. We have a cap limit for a reason, get to zero, and he's done that almost all the time. So I think the Cowboys are going to find a way to make it work and probably win the NFC East. Yeah,
I was going to say I think they're the favorites right now. For some reason, Washington releases Alex Smith, who was like one of the main reasons they came together a team to make the playoffs. I don't know what's going on there. I think there's going to be a lot of teams trying to get Alex Smith. Brian, wouldn't Alex Smith be a great backup for Trevor Lawrence, reuniting with Urban Meyer in Jacksonville?
Yeah, he'd be a great backup for a lot of teams. You know how we say, like, that team should get Ryan Fitzpatrick and make sure that they have him just in case? I mean, I think a similar thing with Alex Smith. He's at least proven enough that he's going to be able to run your offense. I think especially for teams that have intentions on making the playoffs or, I mean, what about a team like like the Cowboys that, it has a quarterback that has a history of getting injured, but their roster is still like playoff worthy. Like that type of team that should be going after Alex Smith if he still wants to play.
Yeah, I think he wants to start somewhere, and I guarantee he's going to be starting somewhere at some point in the season because somebody's going to get hurt.
He's not going to get signed to be somebody's starter, though.
No.
Yeah.
He will sign somewhere and end up playing, I think. Maybe Houston wants to sign him as a security blanket. I still don't see, we've been talking about this for weeks. I don't see Deshaun Watson being moved. He's demanding a trade. They're not saying anything, so Michael's holding out so he doesn't have to do his mock draft here.
Push them back.
He doesn't know what to do, so we'll just wait and wait. But free agency is
real good plan.
The other surprising thing, maybe this is more of like a New York thing, but the Giants, they cut Zietler, the offensive lineman, who I thought was one of the best guards in the league, which to me, save money in the salary cap to do what? Sign another quality offensive lineman because the offensive line stinks, and he's actually their best offensive lineman, and he was their key cog in the trading of Odell Beckham Jr. So I don't know what they're thinking there, but Michael, you had to take him some offensive lineman in your mock, but I don't know. To me, it doesn't make sense, and I really hope moving forward here with the next CBA. Well, it's kind of already done, though, but they got to figure out something with this cap situation because I think it's just horrendous the way people just get cut and discarded. And this year, the cap actually, I think I saw is dropping $20 million. So that could be like 3 guys' jobs right there. It's crazy.
Yeah, and, obviously this is such a weird situation with the pandemic having happened and having its impact on the cap space, but we're going to see a lot more cuts, I would assume. There's going to be a lot more guys that become available, especially as teams get the chance to really kind of talk to these free agents and say, hey, are you willing to come here? And if someone says yes, then that means someone else is going to lose their job probably. There's going to be many more notable names that hit the market, especially when that new league year restarts at June 1st and more money is available to the teams.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. A lot of teams have a lot of needs. And luckily, they get a nice blueprint from you, Michael. One of the teams we're going to talking about some AFC South teams today, the 2 best teams. One of the teams, recently got their new quarterback, and I don't know how it's going to work out, but we'll see. We'll see how you got things going here with your blueprint, Michael.
Yeah, let's start it off right away with the mock draft. First round, I have him going Christian Darrisaw, the offensive tackle out of Virginia Tech. Athletically, maybe this guy doesn't bounce off of the film whenever you're watching him, but still, he is tremendously solid. He is a pretty powerful mover. I think he's going to be a dependable left tackle for a very long time. Currently, I have him ranked as my offensive tackle number 2, and I think he's just a phenomenal, reliable, dependable blocker that can get around the field when needed. He drops into his pass sets well. The biggest issue is just how he works as a pulling blocker, but I think, that's something that can easily grow. And there's still moments on tape where he flashes and he looks good enough. So for Darrisaw, I think this is absolutely a phenomenal pick for the Colts, a value that I think is tremendous here late in the first and should be a long-term starter, adding to an offensive line that has already been very good for a long time. In the second round, I have him going Terence Marshall, Jr., wide receiver out of LSU. You look at what he can bring to the table, and you look at the Colts receiving core. There's a guy like T.Y. Hilton, a guy like Michael Pittman Jr., and a guy like Paris Campbell. I think looking at T.Y. Hilton, he's got a limited time left with the Colts. He may not even return in free agency. I think he will, but still, they need to address the situation. Adding a guy like Marshall in the second round can help be a long-term answer at your receiving group, give you some depth, allow you to go forward wide pretty easily with a very good wide receiver unit. You have Wentz getting weapons. A guy like Marshall in year 1 could contribute, but in year 2, year 3, looking further down the line, I think he's going to be a very dependable starter and an excellent addition for the Colts. In the fourth round, Garrett Wallow, linebacker out of TCU. This guy was a former safety, offers that athleticism that the Indianapolis Colts have kind of followed their mold for when it comes to their linebackers. I think Anthony Walker is gone in free agency. There's no reason to pay him as much as other teams are probably going to be willing to. So adding an athlete with coverage ability fits the mold of the Colts typical linebacker, prototype, and getting a guy like Wallow in the 4th round, allowing Leonard and Okereke to really be the main linebackers for this team, I think is an absolutely phenomenal pick. And someone that, while you may not want your day 3 pick starting, Wallow is a guy that I think could step in and be a nice contributing starter on day 1 for the Indianapolis Colts. In the 5th round, I have him going Cole Van Lennon, offensive lineman out of Wisconsin. Currently, he's playing offensive tackle. You look at the Colts situation, and while they have plenty of money, next year, Mark Glowinski and Braden Smith are going to be free agents. I assume they're going to prioritize keeping Braden Smith, but you want to try to get someone that can hopefully fill in at that right guard spot in case the money is too high. A guy like Van Lanen, I think, could do that as a day 3 pick. You hopefully develop him into becoming your starting right guard of the future, and you keep that offensive line going, which has been the recipe of success for Indianapolis. In the 6th round, we go with a local favorite of mine, Nate Hobbs, cornerback out of Illinois. I'm a huge fan of this guy, and I think with his pro day, he has now registered his name into an official one to watch for the draft, a day 3 corner that I think has tremendous size, ball skills, and physicality. Look for him to potentially be a day 3 pick or maybe even UDFA, but find his way onto a roster and stick around in the league for a while. In the 6th round for the Colts, I think it'd be a wonderful pick. And with the 7th round, I have him getting a depth safety with special teams upside in D'Angelo Amos. At James Madison, he transferred to Virginia, but ended up not playing the season due to the pandemic. Look for a guy like Amos to, probably go undrafted just because of the unknowns about him. But I think this is someone that, with the upside that he offers in terms of special teams, we could still see his name on day 3. So in terms of this draft, addressing needs, the Colts, probably one of the better rosters in the NFL, but the big question mark comes down to Carson Wentz. In terms of the other needs, though, and addressing it in this draft, what do you guys think of it?
Listen, the Colts, they always draft well. So they always find these hidden gems. A few years ago, they have the offensive rookie of the year. Then they have the defensive, not the offensive rookie of the year, but all pro in Nelson. Then they have defensive rookie of the year, linebacker. So you got to. I trust what the Colts are doing. Every year they're always like a few pieces away from making it theirs. We'll see what happens. More so than anything else, what it's going to come down to for this Colts team is going to be their quarterback. Can Wentz turn it around? Because if I look at this team, they don't have any really weaknesses. Great offensive line, great running back with Taylor. Maybe they could use another, receiver or tight end. We'll see what you have doing there. Hunter Henry would be awesome for this team as the Chargers let him go, which was really surprising. The defense, it's really solid. So, again, it's going to be the Colts. They're going to be in the mix for the playoffs, and it's going to be them or the Titans winning the South once again.
Brian, what do you think of this draft?
I think this draft is great. There's 2 spots that this team is going to have to address. It's tackle. Obviously, Costanzo retires, and that's a huge hole to fill. And you already got the quarterback, so there's no point in getting your quarterback and then not protecting that quarterback. They don't have that many holes, but the good news is that the Colts are like a choose-your-own-adventure. They have a few draft picks, and they also have a ton of money to work with, so they know better than us what they want to use to address which positions. But in terms of the mock draft, they probably maybe won't have – they might not even have T.Y. Hilton back. So getting a tackle and getting a wide receiver, the top 2 things, you nailed it. You even got another tackle later on. Depth never hurts. And as Nick said, they always draft well, especially along the offensive line. They have a history of drafting well. So I feel pretty good about it. This team's the favorite in the AFC South for a reason.
And now we look at it from their offense, and starting things off, it's Carson Wentz, and that's the big question mark for this team. Can he turn it around? Can he become that MVP candidate that we saw in years past? Having Carson Wentz, having Jonathan Taylor, receiving weapons like T.Y. Hilton back, Michael Pittman in year 2, Paris Campbell in the slot, again, Terence Marshall, Zach Pascal probably as depth. It makes this receiving unit pretty strong as long as Carson Wentz can really take advantage of it. And then Jack Doyle back at tight end. I think there's definitely a possibility that they pursue a more illustrious weapon in the free agency cycle. A guy like Jonnu Smith, maybe a guy like Gerald Everett. But I think Jack Doyle is a dependable tight end to have as your starter. The offensive line is a lot of the same. We already talked about Darisaw, but then you have Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Mark Galinsky, and Braden Smith. Again, the question mark is Carson Wentz. In your guys' opinions, do you think, if you had to bet yes or no, just straight up, do you think Carson Wentz is going to bounce back in the Indianapolis Colts organization?
I think he's going to bounce back, but it depends on what you consider a bounce back. Is he going to be better than last year? Absolutely. Is he going to be Carson Wentz, who could have potentially won the MVP before he got hurt? No, I don't think we're going to see that type of player again. But hey, they'll definitely help playing in front of Nelson, Kelly, Lewinsky, and Smith. So he's going to have more time. Should be good in that aspect. But I don't think he's ever going to, end up being that top 10 quarterback that the Eagles thought they were getting in his second year when he was playing phenomenal. But the one thing about Wentz that I can say is since that injury, he's been very healthy and consistent. He's going to be out there every week, every game. And it's not like if he throws a few picks, the Colts fans are going to be calling for Jacoby Brissett to come in. So he's going to play. And I think the key thing here is Frank Reich. He's back with him. That's when he had his most success. So I do think the Colts will bounce back. And Anthony Paradiso kind of asking about that. Says the Colts did pretty good runs last year. Can Wentz do even better? I don't know, Brian. I don't think they're going to do so much better, but I think they could kind of be on par within one or two games, plus or minus, in the win-loss column.
Yeah, I think that the Colts can be every bit as successful as they were with Carson Wentz as they were with 38-year-old Phillip Rivers. I mean, the resume stacked up side by side, and Rivers has been a really good quarterback for a long time. But he was sort of on his last leg last season. He certainly has flaws, and I think that all really Wentz needed was a change of scenery and the team built around him. I think that this team is a kind of a no-brainer pick to win the AFC South. It's not trying to be disrespectful to the team that we'll get to in a little bit, the Titans, but the Colts are really in the driver's seat here. They already got their quarterback and still have a ton of cap space. Usually teams have to spend the cap space or a high draft pick on a quarterback, and they don't really have to do either. So I think they're in a good spot.
Yeah, and I think in regards to Anthony's comments, a lot of people don't acknowledge how much Phillip Rivers seemed to have fallen off in that last year in Los Angeles. He didn't look the same. And then he came to Indianapolis and he put together a pretty good year. And I think a lot of that credit should be going to Frank Reich, which I don't think is currently being given to him. So a guy like Carson Wentz, I think, is absolutely going to turn it around. I agree with you, Nick, that I don't think we're going to see the former MVP candidate, Carson Wentz, absolutely carving up the league. But I think he's going to do his job well enough to where the Colts are going to be a very deadly team and one that could, if the offseason goes well enough, could potentially be competing for the AFC.
Yeah, it's just a shame. We'll never know. We'll never know with Andrew Luck. You never know. You always got to think about that now. But I don't know. I think that, they're going to be in the mix, obviously. But I would have liked to seen Rivers in year 2 in the same system. Because I think he played well last year, and it would have been nice to see. Now we got to see Wentz, who's kind of played in the system before. But again, it's like basically starting all over again for the Colts. And it's very rare that we see a new quarterback on a team come in their first year and, take the team to the Super Bowl. So I wouldn't count on that, but the Colts are definitely going to be a playoff team.
Absolutely. And I think the way that we are looking at it right now, there's not a lot of this money being spent. So we look at the defensive side of things, and that's where they really bring out the bring trucks. Investing in the defensive line, I think, is absolutely huge. Justin Houston is hitting an age to where he's probably not going to be the star that you really want. Denico Autry is a fine defensive end, but if you can get better, that's great. So I have them investing. You already have DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart at defensive tackle, signing Trey Hendrickson, signing Ryan Kerrigan to fill in both defensive end spots, I think puts this defensive line from good to scary. And then you look at the linebacker court, Darius Leonard and Bobby Okereke back, of course, going to be a phenomenal unit. Garrett Wallow filling in as that third linebacker. I think there's plenty of potential there. And then in the secondary, Xavier Rhodes back, Kenny Moore back, and Rocky Sin versus Marvell Tell in that slots position. Hopefully the cornerback unit can continue to grow. I think that slot cornerback position is one that's probably the biggest question mark when looking at this team, aside from, maybe Garrett Wallow, who would be a fourth-round rookie in that position. And then at the safety spots, Julian Blackman and Kari Willis, who both are very underrated and have started off their careers very young and very well. So absolutely an enticing defense. And if they can spend at that edge spot, maybe not Hendrickson, but a Carl Lawson. Maybe not Carl Lawson, but, a Melvin Ingram. There's plenty of options in this free agency market, and I think the Colts are going to spend, and I'm excited to see it. What do you guys think of this defense, and what do you think of the Colts in terms of just overall projection for the season?
Well, first I got to say, Rocky Sin is probably the best name in the NFL. I mean, what an incredible name there. But Hendrickson and Kerrigan coming in for edge rush here, that'd be a big offseason for the Colts, and definitely would put their defense even higher up in the ranks than it already is. And putting Garrett Wallow in there, at the linebacking core to go along with Darius Leonard really takes a lot of pressure off of him, so he can kind of come in, fly under the radar, and could be a really good defense here.
Brian, what are your thoughts on it? And from a betting perspective, how are you looking at the Colts this offseason in terms of winning the AFC South?
Yeah, I think that as long as they bring back Xavier Rhodes, they're going to be in a pretty good spot. You kind of know that the resources are going to go toward edge, which is what you have them doing here. I think that addressing those two areas is going to put them in a great spot. They are the favorite, according to DraftKings. They're about even money, -106, a slight favorite over Tennessee. And I kind of think there's no contest. These two teams were really even over the course of maybe the entire year last year. They split when they played each other, but the Colts are really in a position to, I think, take over. I think just the question marks about Wentz and how that's going to work out is the only reason why this isn't a more lopsided line from a betting perspective. But I think it's going to be pretty obvious that in the first week of September that the Colts are going to be the best all-around team in that division.
And, looking at that division, the next team we're going to talk about today is the Tennessee Titans. A lot of question marks about the Tennessee Titans in terms of who they're going to be able to bring back. While they have some money to be able to spend, there's question marks. Looking at guys like Jonnu Smith, looking at guys like Corey Davis, looking at guys like Jayon Brown, Daquan Jones. There are people that are going to be hard to bring back on this roster. Malcolm Butler, already a victim of the tight cap space situation in the NFL. The Titans have some question marks, and they have some positions that they're going to need to address. But if they can get some of these guys back, I think they're going to be able to bring back a Jayon Brown, probably let Corey Davis walk. But I think there's options around the league that they could potentially fill in at that tight end spot to make it a lot cheaper. What do you guys think of the Titans offseason and just how difficult it'll be to really bring back some of their star pieces that are now on the open market?
It's always tough. It's the salary cap we talked about earlier, but it's challenging to really make the playoffs more than 3 years in a row. Titans are now at that point here where they could be in for a slip up. They have a lot of big free agents, but really their whole offense has just been Derrick Henry. So eventually he might get some wear and tear here, and if he's injured, they're going to be in trouble. So, the Titans, we always hear about this great Titans defense because Vrabel's their head coach. But if you look at the numbers last year, they weren't like an elite defense like you saw in the playoffs the year before. So it's definitely going to be challenging there. Again, I think this is like a team for me that's like a perpetual 9-7 team. I don't ever see them really being more than 10-6, and I don't see them being any worse than 8-8. And I've just been saying that for like 3 years now. But it's tough. It's tough. But the good thing with them is that they're in the AFC South, and the Texans are going to be brutal. So it could be two wins there for them easily. But the same thing could be said for the Colts. They're going to get those 2 wins easily.
Yeah, now with the 17-game season, they got to go somewhere from 9-7, whether it's 10-7 or 9-8. They got to make a choice. We'll see what they do.
Well, that's true, but I don't know. They didn't officially say that we're going to be 17 games this year, right? I mean, they're waiting on the COVID stuff, so it's supposed to be 17 games, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. 9-8. 9-8. 9-8. if they're going to play 17 weeks, because there's also interesting about the 17 weeks is going to be. September football is going to be really sloppy because nobody's going to really there's going to be nobody want to take any risk in preseason. And also there's going to be some resting of players early on in the season to get through that 17-game season. But you do get the extra bye week. So we'll see how that works out.
And we'll jump right into the draft section of the Tennessee Titans mock offseason. In the first round, I have him going Azeez Ojulari, a speed rusher out of Georgia, one of the most enticing prospects in this class, one of the youngest prospects in this class. He's going to be a menace off the edge. There's definitely some question marks in terms of pass rush refinement, in terms of just overall motor from play to play, and just trying to make him a more dependable edge rusher, not in terms of just pass rush ability, but also run stuffing ability. If he can grow like there is potential for him to do, then he could be special. And in this class, that's really the name of the game. It's just there's so much potential all throughout these late first to really seventh round guys that are going to be high upside potential steals in this class. And I think as we get along further, we'll see a lot of great day 2, day 3 picks and maybe even some free agency steals in the UDFA process. In the second round, we're looking at Elijah Molden, cornerback out of Washington, probably going to fill into that slot cornerback position, steal the Desmond King role that he will likely be hitting the free agency market and not be back. Getting a guy like Molden with the toughness that he has, with the ability that he has, I think is absolutely a must need for the Titans. Looking at cornerback, they obviously have Adoree Jackson, who I think is phenomenal at the cornerback position. But then after that, there's question marks. There's guys like Christian Fulton and there's other people in this system, but really they need to address the cornerback position. And I think getting a guy like Molden to fill in as that third starter would at least help alleviate the issues in terms of, the position as a whole. In the third round, I'm going Tommy Togai, the defensive lineman out of Ohio State. You look at what he's been able to do as a pass rusher, and I think he's absolutely a strong option. Jack Crawford likely returns to the Tennessee Titans, in my opinion, but I think they will look to have a young player hopefully replace him. A guy like Togai could be a great option in terms of just overall frame, overall strength, and pass rush ability out of a defensive end, 3-tech, 5-tech spot. And I think in terms of needs, this is exactly what they should do because you get Simmons and another young defensive lineman there at the defensive end spots, and you're just going to be a menace to other teams in the league. In that next third-round pick, I have him taking Seth Williams, wide receiver out of Auburn, a playmaker really at the wide receiver spot, a physical receiver, has great frame, great size. The issue is consistency in terms of just play-to-play effort, and there's some drops that are definitely on his record. Kind of reminds me of Braylon Edwards back in his days in Cleveland, one of the better receivers in the class, in the entire field in the NFL, and he just had so many moments where it's just headache drops, and you're like, come on, you could be so good if you would just stop this. And it's going to be an issue for Williams. If he can overcome that, then he will be an absolute steal in this third round and be a great pick for the Titans going forward. In the fourth round, I have him taking Drake Jackson, the center out of Kentucky. You look at the free agency cycles coming up for the Titans, and this free agency cycle is hitting them hard because they weren't able to replace a lot of the talent that was on the roster. So getting a guy like Drake Jackson who can sit behind Ben Jones and hopefully take that starting spot after a year would be absolutely phenomenal, allow the Titans to keep some of their bigger money for other positions. So getting a guy like Drake Jackson in the fourth round, hopefully a starter in his year 2 in the NFL, I think is the exact direction that I would take if I were the Titans. In the fifth round, I have him going Thomas Graham, cornerback out of Oregon. Talked about it earlier. They need some more depth at this position. I love Graham. I think he's a great day 3 corner. I think he's going to be a very dependable depth option. The issue for him in terms of why he's being drafted day 3 and not earlier is because he's this 5'10" corner that is pretty much viewed as strictly outside. I don't think that necessarily kills him and makes him a non-factor at the cornerback position. I think he's still going to carve out a very successful career, but I do understand why there are questions, and he's going to have to overcome those in order to earn a long-term role with the Titans. In the 6th round, I'm going Jamien Sherwood, safety out of Auburn, an absolute physical specimen. You can bring him down to linebacker if you need, have him play dimebacker, have him play strong safety. You're going to find some great plays. This guy can absolutely lay down some huge hits, and you look at just overall what the Titans need, and I think safety depth is a huge part of that. Getting a guy like Jamien Sherwood in that room, both for special teams capabilities and just defensive depth, is absolutely huge in helping the secondary out. And with their final pick of the draft in the 6th round, I have them going Derrick Barnes, linebacker out of Purdue, a linebacker edge hybrid type player. Mostly was a linebacker, but lined up at the defensive end spot for Purdue plenty of times throughout the year. Adding him to both be behind guys like Landry, behind Ojulari, but also being able to have him behind Rashaan Evans, behind Jayon Brown is absolutely huge. So getting him in the 6th round is a great pick, in my opinion, and allows to help out the depth of this team with a day 3 pick, which is a lot in terms of, you aren't going to hit with these superstars at every pick. So getting a depth guy like Derrick Barnes, I think, is definitely a great pick in the day 3 range. So, yeah. Brian, Nick, what do you guys think of this draft, and what are your opinions of the Titans going forward?
I think Thomas Graham in the 5th round is a good pick. He opted out of his senior season in 2020. So I think, Michael, he was definitely hurt by that. Seems like you like him a lot too. We'll see how this works out the combine here, because there's not really going to be a way for a lot of these guys to jump off the boards like they may have, especially if they opt out in their senior season. So I wonder if a lot of these guys who are going to the draft now, who weren't the no-brainer, 1st-round picks, are regretting opting out of their senior season when they're seeing mock drafts where they're thinking they're going to be a day 1 or 2 guy, and they're going in the 5th or 6th round.
Absolutely. And Brian, what are your thoughts on this draft?
Well, I love your mock draft for this team also, because you addressed what their needs were. You even took 2 cornerbacks, which I don't think anybody who's a Titans fan would actually complain about. Their defense was really, really bad last year. And, you could go through all the stats that they want. They got no pressure, but they also allowed like the 2nd most points in the league and were top 5 in yards allowed too. They were brutal. But you could tell by the recent moves of getting rid of Malcolm Butler, and Vaccaro's not going to be back, that they feel like, as you mentioned, Adoree Jackson's going to be back and going to be, the number 1 player that they need, but it's still such a thin position. Their defense was fraudulent even last year. This is the reason why people, including myself, weren't going to pick them to win games in the playoffs, even though they did play a pretty close, low-scoring game with Baltimore, as it turned out. But they're just not a complete team and don't really have the cap space to be complete. I mean, they could still go a long way towards rebuilding their defense in this draft, and I think that that's kind of what you've tried to do. But I don't know about them. I don't know about them keeping up with the Colts this year, even with their offense and even with AJ Brown, assuming Corey Davis isn't back.
Absolutely, there's going to be some question marks about this team, but let's dive in and set some of the answers straight about this offense. At the QB position, it's Ryan Tannehill, and that is not going to change unless something tragic happens, because this guy has been phenomenal for the Titans. Absolutely a beast at the QB position. At running back, more of the same. Derrick Henry is going to be the recipe for success for Tennessee. Even with Arthur Smith gone, expect Henry to still be the main focus point of this offense. At the wide receiver position, Corey Davis hitting the market. They need to find a cheap but still productive alternative. AJ Brown's going to be your star, but I think getting a guy like John Brown to be that deep threat for this team would be absolutely a wonderful fit. You look at just his deep ball ability, and Corey Davis was kind of used as the deep threat in terms of their passing game, because that play action long shot is just a great weapon to have. Getting a guy like John Brown who can extend the field as well as he can, allowing AJ Brown to get open underneath because more guys are having to respect the deep ball, I think it's absolutely going to play into their favor. So getting a guy like John Brown would be huge for the Titans, and I think it would make this team really probably more efficient, even though I think Corey Davis one-on-one in terms of compared to John Brown is probably better. I think John Brown is the better fit with the Titans. And then in that third wide receiver spot, even though they may not run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, Seth Williams is right there. They're going to add some other options as well, probably cheap signings, or maybe they address it otherwise in free agency or the draft. But I think this is the way to go. And then for that tight end spot, I have him trading a 2022 pick for O.J. Howard. I think this is going to be a guy that is going to have a nice trade market. So you're looking at, a 4th or 5th round pick for him. But I think he can do a lot of the same things that Jonnu does. He's a great blocker. The big question is just, trying to get him into a productive receiver. I think the early years for Bruce Arians' offense and Jameis Winston, they just didn't depend on tight end as much as they probably should have. And O.J. Howard was the main person who really got hurt by that. So I think in terms of rebuilding him and getting him to another team in a place like Tennessee, I think he's going to flourish and have a great year. The offensive line, we're keeping it exactly the same. Taylor Lewan, Roger Saffold, Ben Jones, Nate Davis, Dennis Kelly. I think there's definitely potential for, depth picks and signings in the free agency market. But I think as far as starters go, they should try to keep it much of the same because this offensive line was very successful. Nick, Brian, what do you guys think of this offense?
Well, John Brown would be a good signing. John Brown has come out and said he wants to be a Steeler, though, which is bizarre. But he also said he wonders if Josh Allen had any say in him getting cut. Just another cap casualty here. But yeah, they've got the 2 Browns. Maybe they could get Antonio Brown too, and just could totally, get a UPS commercial or something. What could Brown do for you? I think that'd be pretty cool.
Brian, what are your thoughts on it?
I still think they're going to score some points, and they probably will get another wide receiver, as you have here. John Brown's a reliable chains mover. If Ryan Tannehill definitely enjoy having him in the slot with A.J. Brown on the outside. And they have Derrick Henry, so they'll still score points. But, so from an offensive standpoint, they'll be decent. I expect them to be very good. It's whether or not they're going to be playing in these shootout games and have to score over 30 points, or whether they can sort of manage a game. So that part remains to be seen, right?
Absolutely. Now the big question mark for this team is the defensive side of things. So let's take a look. On the defensive line, I don't think the question marks are going to be there much. Jeffrey Simmons, Daquan Jones, and Jack Crawford filling in on that interior defensive line. The edge spot is definitely the question mark here. Can Azeez Ojulari produce in year 1? Harold Landry obviously going to be back at that other edge spot. You could potentially see some other signings there as well. I think they are going to get a veteran guy to really help out with that defensive line. And then at the linebacker spots, Rashaan Evans and Jayon Brown being brought back in free agency. At corner, we look at Adoree Jackson, Christian Fulton, Elijah Molden. If Fulton can have a good year too, then this cornerback group can be very solid. But the biggest question mark is going to be, who's playing that slot spot and who's cornerback 2 and how are they going to do? Fulton seems like the obvious cornerback 2, but, we could see them potentially look at the free agency market and try to bring in a big name. Who knows? At the safety spots, Kevin Byard is one of the best safeties in football, probably the best free safety in terms of just overall coverage ability. Him and Minkah Fitzpatrick kind of higher above everyone else. Maybe Jesse Bates is in the argument. And then a strong safety, Amani Hooker, who I think is phenomenal, going to be a great player in this season. I think Kenny Vaccaro and him do a lot of the same things, but I think, with the youth that Hooker brings, the cheaper cap hit, it was definitely worth letting go of Vaccaro because Hooker's going to be a stud. What do you guys think of this defense? And really, what do you guys think of the Titans' chances this season?
I don't think this defense is good enough to contend for a title. Like Brian mentioned and I mentioned earlier, you hear about this great Mike Vrabel defense, but it's really fictional for the most part. It's not there numbers wise. I think they're going to struggle here. They weren't that great last year. I see you only have 2 additions in here, both coming via the draft. So I think if they're going to make some noise here, they got to do some more to upgrade their defense.
Yeah, I still think they have a chance at making the playoffs. When you look at the AFC, you have the Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, Browns, Dolphins, and I think the Colts, that are all, at least on paper, better than the Titans. I know that things can change, but that doesn't even count, any potential bounce back from the Steelers or
Jaguars could have an ace path to the playoffs too.
Yeah, so like there's we're not talking about the Raiders, who could potentially be a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's room every year for teams.
The Chargers have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, so you can never count out a team when they have such a good quarterback.
Yeah, I think that there are more questions with Tennessee than there are with some of these other teams, and they have had a lot of success recently, but I don't think they've. Part of it's because of the cap space now, that they're not going to be able to do enough to keep up with maybe those top 3 or 4 teams in the AFC, especially. But they'll have a chance to make the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to win that division.
Yeah, and I think with the constant moving parts that are the playoff system, there's going to be a lot of change in terms of what teams are in it, and the Titans could very well be one of the teams that are one of the odd mans out whenever it comes to it, especially with all the potential that's in the AFC. Even a team like the Broncos or a team like the Jaguars, like Nick said, there's maybe not as much optimism about them being competitive year one, but there's definitely talent there where if things go right this offseason, they could make that next step and really be in the playoffs, while the Titans or other teams, maybe like the Colts that we talked about, if Carson Wentz doesn't play well, could be watching from home. That's all we got for you guys today on Destination Draft Day. I'm Michael Rockman, joined by Nick Durst and Brian Sosa. Thank you guys so much for everyone who watched. We apologize to our Twitch audience as we weren't able to get it working today. Thank you to everyone in the comment section. Thank you to LandryFootball.com. And like we talked about earlier in the show, if you find yourself out and about in a store that's selling magazines, buy yourself a copy of the Lindy's 2021 NFL Draft Guide. We hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you Monday. Take care.